Political Judaism, or what you can call Zionism, is a deviation from Judaism. None of the founders of political Judaism were religious people. In fact, they held religious Jews in contempt, and religious Jews held them in contempt originally because they're extremists, they're deviants, they're heretics to Judaism. They've corrupted the Jews from their religion, and that's a fact. Zionists are religiously ignorant people, just like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any extremist, violent, deviant Muslim group. They take what they want from their scriptures and they leave what they want to justify violence and power and domination. That's not what Judaism is about. Netanyahu is not a religious man. Theodor Herzl or Ben Gurion or Ariel Sharon, they weren't rabbis, just like ISIS. They cynically and opportunistically cut and paste whatever they want from religious texts to manipulate and mislead and rationalize their completely secular project of Zionism. They only tolerate religious Jews in Israel because they're the only ones who have babies. And the secular project of Zionism has always been plagued by a demographics problem. You know, atheists don't procreate very much, and most Zionists are mostly atheists. I think half of Israelis identify as secular, and more than half say that you don't even have to believe in God to be a Jew, and about a quarter of them don't believe in God. That's why religious Jews don't even regard Zionists as Jews, because they're deviant, they're corrupt, and they're obsessed with power. And they're corrupt with power when they get it. They're immoral with power. They're vicious. Again, just like ISIS, because it's an extremist political ideology that uses religion and religious identity as a mask. Look, I've said time and time again, Muslims have never had a problem with Jews. Muslims and Jews lived together for centuries in peace and mutual prosperity. Religious Jews, that is, in Palestine. We always lived together, even if that meant that we had to bring Jews back into lands after the Muslims took them over because other people had exiled them. The Jews are the descendants of Ishaq. The Arabs are the descendants of Ismail. We're cousins. And religious Jews know and they understand that the descendants of Ismail are the people who will establish justice and righteousness on the earth. That's the religious view. Religious Jews know that. Rabbis know that. They know that religiously they're not supposed to have a kingdom in Palestine. They're not supposed to have a kingdom in Jerusalem, but they are supposed to live safely under the protection and the leadership of their cousins, under the Muslims. That's the religious position, and that's what actual history evidences to have been true and to be true, because that's the only time and the only place when Jews were safe and where they were safe, and that was under Muslim rule. Look, the Jews are ruling Palestine now. Are they safe? Is their religion protected? No. They've lost their religion. They've corrupted their religion. They've put themselves under the Christians, under the West, under the United States, and it has ruined them. They put themselves under the protection of the people who have only ever hated them, who have only ever been cruel towards them, and they turned them against the people who have only ever been benevolent towards them. And the people who their own religion teaches them are the people of justice and goodness. This is Zionism. Political Judaism. It's not Judaism. It's not the religion. I mean, yeah, you will find ayat in the Quran that criticize and chastise Jews, but that's specifically irreligious Jews, Jews who disobeyed their own laws. And you'll find those same types of Jews being criticized and chastised in the Torah, even more harshly. It isn't criticism of them as Jews, but criticism of religious disobedience, of rebelliousness against God. And that's what the Zionists are today. They're irreligious, disobedient, rebellious deviants. They're rebellious against God, and that's why they're so ruthless and so barbaric. That's why they bomb hospitals and murder babies and try to starve people and make them die of thirst, blow entire families to pieces. They're cousins, the people of justice and righteousness. That's why there's such an abnormal level of brutality. Why the Zionists are so savage and unnatural. Because they're unholy. Their ideology is unholy. It's uniquely blasphemous violence. You know that old Zionist slogan, a land without a people for a people without a land? Now, of course, we all know that Palestine has been continuously inhabited for thousands of years. It's never been a land without a people. But the thing that people overlook is that among the people who were in that land of Palestine before the Zionists came were Jews. Any Jews in Europe had over 1,000 years to go to Palestine if they'd wanted to go. It's not about going back to their homeland, because under the Muslims, they always could have gone to Palestine. We never stopped them. The Zionists weren't even thinking about Palestine initially. They were going to go to Uganda. There's nothing religious about Zionism. Not actually. Because those religious Jews in Europe stayed there. They knew that they didn't have a claim on Palestine. That's why they never went there in all those centuries. I mean, the Jews who were already there, the Jews who were living in Palestine already, had been there all along under the Muslims. But the Jews who had been banished to different parts of the world by the Christians, they stayed away for religious reasons. There's no religious basis for the Jews to control Palestine. That goes against the Jewish religion, and they know it. I mean, why isn't Ben Shapiro in Jerusalem right now? Why doesn't he live in Israel? He's living in California. Well, he's just like those extremist Muslim keyboard jihadi types, who go on and on about Sharia and Khilafah and Islamic State and all of that. But you couldn't pry them out of their suburban homes in Houston or Los Angeles because they know they're just talking rubbish. Ben Shapiro claims to be an Orthodox Jew. Well, the only evidence that there is that he is an Orthodox Jew is exactly the fact that he doesn't live in Israel, because Orthodox Jews know it's wrong. But he still goes hysterical in his demented defense of Zionism. That's not a Jewish Orthodox position, but he works for the Daily Wire. He's a co-owner of the Daily Wire. But the Daily Wire was started by Ferris Wilks, who's a man who belongs to a radical right-wing quasi-Christian sect. And their church, the church that man belongs to, is a weird pastiche of Christians and so-called Jews for Jesus. Now, Ben Shapiro is an imposter Orthodox Jew. He's an oxymoron, promoting deeply anti-Judaic Zionism while not living in Israel, because he works for a cult. It's called the Assemblies of Yahweh. Look it up. It's a strange admixture of Judaism and Christianity. And they have this idea that the world is under something called the beast system, and they're obsessed with the idea of a one world government and so on. They're just like the Imran Hussein types, who go on and on about the Dajjal system and all that. They're fanatic cultists, posing as traditional conservatives. And Dennis Prager's the same. These people don't care about Jews. They don't care about Judaism. They're insane. They want to bring about what they call the Great Tribulation. And this intersects then with the fanatic evangelical Christians who daydream about Armageddon. I'm telling you, the lunatics have taken over the asylum. And these are the same people who are always talking about logic and reason and facts don't care about your feelings, but they are literally crazy people. They may as well believe in the mothership. But what they all have in common is anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, anti-Orthodox religion. And they're among Netanyahu's biggest cheerleaders. You people are always talking about the so-called dangers of Muslim extremism. But you have been empowering, arming, funding, promoting, supporting, and whitewashing the most violent, the most dangerous, the most savage, the most radical form of extremism there is. And you've been doing it for decades. A genocidal, apocalyptic, inhuman extremism, and that's Zionism. Zionism has killed more people in just the last 3 weeks than have died in the Russian-Ukraine war in almost 2 years. It's a plague on humanity, and it's a plague on the Jews. But what the Orthodox Jews believe about Bani Ismail, about the Muslims, is right. What they say about the Muslims is right. What they believe about the Muslims is right. We are the people who will establish justice and righteousness and integrity on the earth. It's the Muslim world that's been mediating during this conflict. It's the Muslims who've been engaging in nonstop diplomacy. It's the Muslims who are trying to achieve a ceasefire. It's the Muslims who are trying to prevent this conflict from escalating and spreading throughout the region. It's the Muslims who are upholding their agreements, who are keeping their word, and who are trying to assert some sanity in this madness. And it's the Muslims who are maneuvering the United States and the West out of the scenario. It's the Muslims, the Muslim public all around the world, who are undertaking all types of nonviolent protest and opposition to try to end the Zionist carnage in Gaza. It's the Muslims who are displaying civilized self-restraint and discipline, even while our hearts are burning with anger and anguish for our brothers and sisters in Gaza. And it's the Muslims, just like in Malaysia, where they're boycotting Starbucks so strong that that company might have to shut down in that country. It's the Muslims who are pioneering a new approach and a new philosophy of political activism that can potentially empower the masses all around the world to confront the tyrannical power of the private sector. The Muslims are leading the liberation struggle against every form of imperialism and colonialism there is, not just in Palestine, but in Niger, in Burkina Faso against the French, in Tunisia against the IMF, in Indonesia and Malaysia against the US dollar, and yes, in the Gulf states against American and Western hegemony in the Middle East. And good, decent, moral people everywhere are being brought to their senses about Zionism and about Western imperialism and brutality. The barbarity and the fanaticism of the Zionists is getting exposed all across social media. And the faith and the moral power of the Palestinians is juxtaposed right alongside that. The warmongering of the West and the restraint and the diplomacy of the Muslim world are being witnessed by everyone in stark contrast. I wouldn't be surprised if for every martyr that they kill in Gaza, someone somewhere takes the Shahada, because the truth stands out clear from falsehood, and it doesn't stand out any clearer anywhere than it does right now in Palestine.